everyone. I'm Miss Toby and I'm one of the Youth Services Assistants at South Charleston Public Library. This week we've been celebrating Banned Books Week, which is a very important week for libraries and readers all over the world. On Banned Books Week we celebrate books that have been banned or challenged somewhere in the world, and we do that by reading them. Banned books are books that for one reason or another someone didn't want available in a library, or a group of people didn't want available in a library or school or even a country. And librarians and teachers and readers and parents have worked really hard to make sure that everyone is still able to read the books that they want to read. Though it's kind of sad, in some places books are still banned and they're still removed from shelves in some libraries and schools and even in some countries. But at South Charleston we work really hard to make sure that every family has the book that they want to read. We always recommend that you talk to your children about the books they are reading and make sure that they are books that are okay with your family. But we do want everyone to have access to everything that they would need. So not all books are for all people, and Banned Books Week celebrates that all people get to read the books that they want and need to read. So we are also starting a program called First Chapter Fridays. On First Chapter Fridays, we will read to you a chapter out of a book that we like in our collection here at South Charleston. And, I'm at home right now, but that we love at the library. And we just want to share with you some things we have available. This week, we're going to read a banned book to celebrate Banned Books Week. Our book this week is Bridge to Terabithia by HarperCollins Publishers. It is, from HarperCollins Publishers. It is written by Katherine Patterson and is illustrated by Donna Diamond. The dedication here says, "I wrote this book for my son, David Lloyd Patterson, but after he read it, he asked me to put Lisa's name on this page as well, and so I do. For David Patterson and Lisa Hill, Banzai." Chapter 1. Jesse Oliver Aarons Jr. Baroom, 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 barippity, 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 barippity. Good. His dad had the pickup going. He could get up now. Jess slid out of bed and into his overalls. He didn't worry about a shirt, because once he began running, he would be as hot as popping grease, even if the morning air was still chill. Or shoes, because the bottom of his feet were by now as tough as his worn-out sneakers. "Where are you going, Jess?" Maybelle lifted herself up sleepily from the double bed where she and Joyce Ann slept. "Shh," he warned. The walls were thin. Mama would be mad as flies in a fruit jar if they woke her up this time of day. He patted Maybelle's hair and yanked the twisted sheet up to her small chin. "Just over the cow field," he whispered. Maybelle smiled and snuggled down into the sheet. "Gonna run?" "Maybe." Of course he was going to run. He'd gotten up early every day all summer to run. He figured if he worked at it, and Lord had he worked, he would be the fastest runner in the 5th grade when the school opened up. He had to be the fastest. Not one of the fastest or the next to fastest, but the fastest, the very best. He tiptoed out of the house. The place was so rattly that it screeched whenever you put your foot down, but Jess found that if you tiptoed, it only gave a low moan, and he could usually get out of doors without waking Mama or Ellie or Brenda or Joyce Ann. Maybelle was another matter. She was going on 7, and she worshipped him, which was okay sometimes. When you were the only boy smashed between 4 sisters, and the older 2 had despised you ever since you were too old for them to dress up and push around in their rusty old doll carriage, and the littlest one cried if you looked at her cross-eyed, it was nice to have somebody who worshipped you, even if it got unhandy sometimes. He began to trot across the yard. His breath was coming out in little puffs, cold for August, but it was early yet. By noontime, when his mom would have him out and working, it would be hot enough. Miss Bessie stared at him sleepily as he climbed across the scrap heap, over the fence, and into the cow field. "Moo," she said, looking for all the world like another Maybelle with her big, brown, droopy eyes. "Hey, Miss Bessie," Jessie said soothingly. "Just go on back to sleep." Miss Bessie strolled over to her greenest patch. Most of the field was brown and dry, and yanked up a mouthful. "That a girl. Just eat your breakfast. Don't pay me no mind." He was always started at the northwest corner of the field, crouched over like the runners he had seen on the wide world of sports. There, you can see him starting to run. Do any of our young runners try to run like that? Start running like that? "Bang!" he said, and took off flying across the cow field. Miss Bessie strolled toward the center, still following him with her droopy eyes, chewing slowly. She didn't look very smart, even for a cow, but she was plenty bright enough to get out of Jessie's way. His straw-colored hair flapped hard against his forehead, and his arms and legs flew out every which way. He had never learned to run properly, but he was long-legged for a 10-year-old, and no one had more grit than he. Lark Creek Elementary was short on everything, especially athletic equipment. So all the balls went to the upper grades at recess time after lunch. Even if a 5th grader started out the period with a ball, it was sure to be in the hands of a 6th or 7th grader before the half hour was over. And the older boys always took the dry center of the upper field for their ball games, while the girls claimed the small top section for their hopscotch and jump rope and hanging around talking. So the lower grade boys had started this running thing. They would all line up on the far side of the lower field, where it was either muddy or deep, crusty ruts. Earl Watson, who was no good at running but had a big mouth, would yell, "Bang!" and they'd race to a line they'd towed across at the other end. One time last year, Jessie had won. Not just the first heat, but the whole shebang. Only once. But it had put into his mouth a taste for winning. Ever since he'd been in the 1st grade, he had been that crazy little kid that draws all the time. But one day, April the 22nd, a drizzly Monday it had been, he ran ahead of all of them, the red mud slooshing up between the holes in the bottom of his sneakers. For the rest of the day, and until after lunch on the next, he had been the fastest kid in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th grades. And he, only a 4th grader. On Tuesday, Wayne Pettis had won as usual. But this year, Wayne Pettis would be in the 6th grade. He'd play football until Christmas and baseball until June with the rest of the big guys. Anybody had a chance to be the fastest runner. And by Miss Bessie, this year it was going to be Jesse Oliver Aarons Jr. Jesse pumped his arms harder and bent his head for the distant fence. He could hear the 3rd grade boys screaming him on. They would follow him around like a country music star, and Maybelle would pop her buttons. Her brother was the fastest, the best. That ought to give the rest of the 1st grade something to chew their cuds on. Even his dad would be proud. Jess rounded the corner. He couldn't keep going quite so fast, but he continued running for a while. It would build him up. Maybelle would tell her daddy, so it wouldn't look like he, Jess, was a bragger. Maybe Dad would be so proud he'd forget about how tired he was from the long drive back and forth to Washington and the digging and the hauling all day, and he would get right down on the floor and wrestle the way he used to. Old Dad would be surprised at how strong he'd gotten the past couple of years. His body was begging him to quit, but Jess pushed on. He had to let that puny chest of his know who was boss. "Jess!" It was Maybelle yelling from the other side of the scrap heap. "Mama says you gotta come in and eat now. Leave the milk until later." "Yeah, okay." He turned, still running, and headed for the scrap heap. Without breaking his rhythm, he climbed over the fence, scrambled across the scrap heap, thumped Maybelle on the head, "Ow!" and trotted into the house. "Well, look at the big Olympic star," said Ellie, banging 2 cups onto the table so that the strong black coffee sloshed out, sweating like a knock-kneed mule. Jesse pushed his damp hair out of his face and plunked down on the wooden bench. He dumped 2 spoonfuls of sugar into his cup and slurped to keep the hot coffee from scalding his mouth. "Ew, Mama, he stinks." Brenda pinched her nose with her pinky crook delicately. "Make him wash." "Get over here to the sink and wash yourself," his mother said, without raising her eyes from the stove, "and step on it. The grits are scorching to the bottom of the pot already." "Mama, not again," Brenda whined. Lord, was he tired. There wasn't a muscle in his body that didn't ache. "You heard what Mama said," Ellie yelled at his back. stand it, Mama, Brenda again. Make him get his smelly self up off the bench. Jess put his head down on the bare wood of the table. Jesse, his mother was looking now, and put on a shirt. Yes'm. He dragged himself to the sink. The water he flicked onto his face and his arms pricked like ice. His hot skin crawled under the cold drops. Maybelle was standing there in the kitchen door watching him. Get me a shirt, Maybelle. Her mouth looked as if it was set to say no, but instead she said, You oughtn't beat me in the head, and went off obediently to fetch his t-shirt. Good old Maybelle. Joyce Ann would have been screaming yet from that little tap. 4-year-olds were a pure pain. I got plenty of chores needs doing around here this morning, his mother announced as they were finishing their grits and red gravy. His mother was from Georgia and still cooked like it. Oh, Mama, Ellie and Brenda squawked in concert. Those girls could get out of work faster than grasshoppers could slip through your fingers. Mama, you promised me and Brenda we could go to Millsburg for school shopping. You ain't got no money for school shopping. Mama, we're just gonna look around. Lord, he wished Brenda would stop whining so. Christmas! You don't want us to have no fun at all. Any fun? Ellie corrected her primly. Oh, shut up. Ellie ignored her. Miss Timmons is coming by to pick us up. I told Lolly on Sunday you said it was okay. I'd feel dumb calling her now, saying you changed your mind. Oh, all right. But I ain't got no money to give you. Any money. Something whispered inside Jessie's head. I know, Mama. We'll just take the $5 Daddy promised us. No more than that. What $5? Oh, Mama, you remember. Ellie's voice was sweeter than a melted Mars bar. Daddy said last week we girls were going to have to have something for school. Oh, take it, his mother said angrily, reaching for her cracked vinyl purse on the shelf above the stove. She counted out 5 wrinkled bills. Mama, Brenda was starting again. Can't we have just one more so it will be 3 each? No. Mama, you can't buy nothing for $2.50. Just one little pack of notebook paper's gone up to. No. Ellie got up noisily and began to clear the table. Your turn to wash, Brenda, she said loudly. Ellie. Ellie jabbed her with a spoon. Jess saw that look. Brenda shut up her wine halfway out of her rose-luster lipsticked mouth. She wasn't as smart as Ellie, but even she knew not to push Mama too far, which left Jessie to do the work as usual. Mama never sent the babies out to help. Although, if he worked it right, he could usually get Maybelle to do something. He put his head down on the table. The running had done him in this morning. Through his top ear came the sound of the Timmons' old Buick. Wants oil, his dad would say, and the happy buzz of voices outside the screen door as Ellie and Brenda smashed in among the 7 Timmonses. All right, Jessie, get your lazy self off the bench. Miss Bessie's bags is probably dragging the ground by now, and you still got beans to pick. Lazy? He was the lazy one? He gave his poor dead weight of a head just one more minute on the tabletop. Jessie! Okay, Mama, I'm going. It was Maybelle who came to tell him in the bean patch that people were moving into the Perkins place down on the next farm. Jesse wiped his hair out of his eyes and squinted. Sure enough, a U-Haul was parked right there by the door. One of those big jointed ones. These people had a lot of junk, but they wouldn't last. The Perkins place was one of those ratty old country houses you moved into because you had no decent place to go, and moved out of as soon as you could. He thought later how peculiar it was that here was probably the biggest thing in his life, and he had shrugged it off as if it was nothing. The flies were buzzing around his sweating face and shoulders. He dropped the beans into the bucket and swatted with both hands. Give me my shirt, Maybelle. The flies were more important than any U-Haul. Maybelle jogged to the end of the row and picked up his t-shirt from where it had been discarded earlier. She walked back, holding it with 2 fingers out in front of her. Ew, it stinks, she said, just as Brenda would have. Shut up, he said, and grabbed the shirt away from her. All right, well, that's the first chapter of Bridge to Terabithia. It's available at the library, and I will put links to where you can find it in our e-resources as well in the description of this video. Thank you guys for joining us. We hope to see you again soon. Just make sure you're keeping an eye on our social media for our programs. If you were able to join us this past week on Tuesday for our live program, we really appreciate it. Just make sure you're keeping an eye for what's coming up in the future. And thank you so much for hanging out with us today. Have a nice weekend.